What I'm about to tell you will haunt you. This is the story of a young woman who disappeared from a small New Mexico town in 2001, just weeks after the world changed forever. For 18 years, her family lived in agony, not knowing if she was alive or dead. Then, in 2019, a phone call came. One simple phone call, and everything they thought they knew about that September night was wrong. This is the story of Melissa Rodriguez and the secret that was buried in the desert for nearly 2 decades. Her name was Melissa Ann Rodriguez. She was 24 years old in the fall of 2001. Melissa had long, dark hair that fell past her shoulders, deep brown eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. Everyone who knew her said the same thing. She was kind, genuinely kind. The type of person who remembered your birthday, who asked about your sick grandmother, who brought you soup when you had the flu. Melissa lived in Alamogordo, New Mexico. If you don't know Alamogordo, it's a small city in the southern part of the state, tucked against the Sacramento Mountains with about 30,000 people. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where you run into your old high school teacher at the grocery store, where secrets are hard to keep. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office on 10th Street. She'd had the job for 3 years and loved it. Melissa was always on time, always cheerful, always wearing colorful scrubs that matched her bubbly personality. The dentist she worked for, Dr. Patricia Chen, said Melissa had a gift for calming nervous patients. Kids especially loved her. She kept a jar of stickers on her desk and let them pick 2 if they were brave. Melissa lived alone in a small 1-bedroom apartment on Indian Wells Road. It wasn't fancy. The carpet was old. The appliances were older. But she'd made it home. She'd painted the walls a soft yellow. She had plants everywhere. Pothos, spider plants, a stubborn fiddle-leaf fig she was determined to keep alive. Her apartment smelled like vanilla candles and the lavender spray she used on her pillows. Every morning, Melissa woke up at 6:30. She'd make coffee in her little French press. She'd eat toast with strawberry jam. She'd watch the local news while getting ready for work. She was a creature of habit, predictable, reliable. But Melissa wasn't boring. She had depth. She loved to read, mystery novels mostly. She belonged to a book club that met every other Thursday at the library. She was halfway through reading an Agatha Christie novel the week she disappeared. The book was still on her nightstand, a bookmark holding her place at page 172. She was close with her family. Her parents, Robert and Carmen Rodriguez, lived just 15 minutes away. Her younger brother, Danny, was 21 and going to community college. They had Sunday dinners together every single week without fail. Carmen would make enchiladas, or pozole, or calabacitas. They'd sit around the table for hours, talking and laughing. Melissa had a best friend named Jennifer. They'd known each other since middle school. They talked on the phone almost every day. They had inside jokes and shared memories that went back over a decade. Jennifer knew everything about Melissa, her fears, her dreams, her secrets. And Melissa had a boyfriend, His name was Travis Holbrook. They'd been dating for about 8 months. It was serious. At least, Melissa thought it was serious. She'd told Jennifer she thought Travis might be the one. They'd talked about moving in together, maybe getting engaged by Christmas. Travis was 27, worked construction, drove a black Ford pickup truck. He was tall, muscular, had sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. He was charming. Everyone liked Travis. He had that easy smile, that confident way of talking. But here's the thing. Looking back, some people started to notice things. Small things. The way he'd show up at Melissa's work unannounced. The way he'd call her multiple times a day. The way he didn't like it when she went out with Jennifer. But in 2001, nobody said anything. Or maybe they did and nobody listened. Because Travis seemed like a good guy, and Melissa seemed happy. She had dreams. She wanted to go back to school eventually. Maybe become a dental hygienist. She wanted to travel. She'd never been outside of New Mexico and wanted to see the ocean. She talked about California, about driving up the Pacific Coast Highway, about putting her feet in the sand. Melissa volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturday mornings. She'd walk the dogs that nobody else wanted to walk, the old ones, the scared ones, the ones that had been there too long. She had a soft spot for the underdogs, literally. She was religious, Catholic. She went to Mass most Sundays at St. Joseph Church. She wore a small silver cross necklace that her grandmother had given her when she made her confirmation. She never took it off. This was Melissa Rodriguez, 24 years old, full of life, full of plans, full of love to give, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a girlfriend, a real person with a real life. Remember her, because what happened to her should never happen to anyone.
Alamogordo in September of 2001. Let me paint you a picture. The town sits at about 4,600 feet elevation, nestled in the Tularosa Basin. To the east, the Sacramento Mountains rise up, their peaks still green in early fall. To the west, the White Sands Desert stretches out like an alien landscape. Alamogordo is the biggest town for miles in any direction. It's isolated. You have to want to go there. You don't just pass through. The town is dominated by Holloman Air Force Base, which sits just a few miles southwest of downtown. Jet fighters scream overhead during the day. The base brings jobs, brings families, brings a transient population that cycles through every few years. But there's also a core of locals, families that have been there for generations. Melissa's apartment was in a complex called Desert View Apartments. It was a 2-story stucco building, painted that dusty beige color that everything in New Mexico seems to be painted. There were maybe 20 units total, a small pool in the courtyard that nobody really used, parking spots in front of each unit. Her apartment, number 12, was on the ground floor facing the parking lot. She had a sliding glass door that opened to a tiny patio. She kept more plants out there. A hummingbird feeder hung from the overhang. The neighborhood was quiet, working class, families, retirees, the kind of place where people minded their own business, but also looked out for each other. If you left your garage door open, someone would knock and let you know. September 2001. You know what was happening in the world. The country was reeling. September 11th had just happened 2 weeks earlier. Everyone was scared. Everyone was glued to their TVs watching the news, trying to make sense of the senseless.
American flags appeared on every house, every car, every storefront. In Alamogordo, the Air Force Base went on high alert. Security increased. People were nervous about flying. The world felt dangerous in a new way. Everyone was looking at strangers differently. Muslims in the community faced harassment. Fear was everywhere. And in the middle of all this chaos, all this national grief and confusion, Melissa Rodriguez vanished. And because the whole country was focused on terrorism and war, because every news channel was covering the same story over and over, a missing girl in a small New Mexico town barely made the news. The weather that September was typical for southern New Mexico. Hot during the day, cooling off at night, clear skies, that endless blue sky that stretches forever. The sun set around 7 in the evening. By 8, it was dark. The apartment complex had outdoor lighting, but it wasn't great. A few bulbs over doorways, a couple of lights in the parking lot, but there were dark spots, shadows, places you could hide if you wanted to. Melissa's apartment was tidy, always tidy. She hated clutter. Everything had a place. Her few pieces of furniture were arranged neatly. Her small TV sat on a stand against one wall. Her couch faced it. Her kitchen was spotless. She washed dishes immediately after using them. This was the world Melissa lived in. This was the place she called home. This is where she felt safe, until she wasn't safe anymore.
September 26, 2001. A Wednesday. A day that started like any other day in Melissa's life. She woke up at 6:30, made her coffee, ate her toast, watched the morning news. They were still covering September 11th, still talking about Osama bin Laden and the Taliban in Afghanistan. She got dressed in her purple scrubs, put on her silver cross necklace, drove to work in her white Honda Civic. She got to the dental office at 8 o'clock, right on time. She greeted Dr. Chen. She turned on the computers. She prepared the waiting room. She put out magazines. She checked the appointment book for the day. It was a normal day. Patients came and went. Cleanings, fillings, one root canal. Melissa checked people in, scheduled follow-up appointments, answered the phone. She ate lunch at her desk, a turkey sandwich and an apple she'd brought from home. She called Jennifer during her lunch break. They talked for 10 minutes. Jennifer asked if she wanted to go see a movie that weekend. Melissa said yes. At 5 o'clock, the office closed. Melissa helped clean up. She said goodbye to Dr. Chen and the dental hygienists. She got in her car. She drove home. She was seen pulling into her parking spot at Desert View Apartments at 5:27 in the evening. A neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, who lived in Unit 14, saw her, waved. Melissa waved back. Melissa went inside her apartment. She changed out of her scrubs. She put on jeans and a blue t-shirt. She called her mom. They talked for about 20 minutes. Carmen asked if she was coming to Sunday dinner. Melissa said, of course. She never missed Sunday dinner. Carmen said she was making tamales. Melissa said she couldn't wait. At 6:30, Travis called. They talked for about 15 minutes. Later, Travis told police they'd made plans for him to come over around 8 o'clock. They were going to watch a movie, just a quiet night in. At 7:15, Melissa called Jennifer back. She told her she was having Travis over, but they'd definitely go to the movies on Saturday. Jennifer said great. They hung up. That was the last time Jennifer ever heard her best friend's voice. At 7:45,
A neighbor named Mr. Patterson, who lived in Unit 8, was taking out his trash. He saw Melissa outside her apartment. She was standing on her little patio, watering her plants with a green watering can. She seemed fine, normal. He waved. She waved back. He went inside. That was the last confirmed sighting of Melissa Rodriguez alive. At 8:05, Travis arrived. He pulled up in his black Ford pickup. He parked next to Melissa's Honda. He got out. He walked to her door. He knocked. Nobody answered. He knocked again. Nothing. He tried calling her cell phone. It rang, but she didn't pick up. He tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. He opened the door. He went inside. The apartment was empty. Melissa wasn't there. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her keys were in the bowl by the door where she always put them. Her cell phone was on the coffee table, but Melissa was gone. Travis looked around. He called her name. He checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the patio. Nothing. He called her parents. Robert and Carmen rushed over. They got there within 10 minutes. They searched the apartment. They searched the area around the apartment. They asked neighbors if anyone had seen her. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody had heard anything. Melissa had simply vanished. At 9:17, Carmen Rodriguez called 911. Her daughter was missing. She'd been there an hour ago, and now she was gone. The dispatcher tried to calm her down, tried to say that sometimes adults leave on their own, that she might have just gone for a walk. Carmen said no, no. Her daughter wouldn't leave without her phone, without her purse, without her keys. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. The police arrived at 9:40. 2 officers from the Alamogordo Police Department. They took statements. They looked around. They radioed for more units. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared to be disturbed. Nothing was broken. There was no blood, no evidence of a struggle. The sliding glass door to the patio was closed, but not locked. The front door had been unlocked when Travis arrived. Her car was in its parking spot. Her keys were inside. Her wallet was in her purse. She had $62 in cash and her credit cards, her driver's license, her library card, everything. Her bed was made. The dishes in the sink were washed. The TV was off. A glass of water sat on the counter, half empty. The book she'd been reading was still on her nightstand. The green watering can she'd been using at 7:45 was on the patio, tipped over, water spilled out. That was the only thing that seemed out of place. Police searched the apartment complex. They knocked on every door. Most people were home, watching TV, having dinner. Nobody had seen Melissa after Mr. Patterson saw her watering her plants. Nobody had heard anything unusual. No screams, no sounds of a struggle, no car speeding away. It was like she'd evaporated into thin air. One moment, she was watering her plants. The next moment, she was gone. And between those 2 moments, something terrible had happened.
Detective Michael Vargas caught the case. He was 48 years old, been with the Alamogordo Police Department for 23 years. He'd worked everything from shoplifting to domestic violence to drug busts, but he'd never worked a missing person case quite like this. From the beginning, Detective Vargas knew this was bad. Adults don't just disappear from their apartments without their phone, their purse, their keys, their car. Especially not women who were creatures of habit. Women who never missed Sunday dinner. Women who called their mothers every single day. The first 48 hours were critical. Everyone in law enforcement knows that. The first 48 hours are when you have the best chance of finding someone alive. After that, the odds drop dramatically. Detective Vargas assembled a team. Officers canvassed the entire neighborhood. They knocked on every door within a half-mile radius. They asked if anyone had seen anything, heard anything, noticed anything unusual. Most people said no. A few mentioned seeing unfamiliar cars in the area, but nobody could provide specific details. It was frustrating. They interviewed everyone who knew Melissa. Her parents, her brother, her co-workers, her friends from book club, her priest. Everyone said the same thing. Melissa was responsible, reliable, predictable. This wasn't like her. Something bad had happened. They interviewed Jennifer, the best friend, extensively. Jennifer was devastated, crying, scared. She told Detective Vargas everything she knew. She said Melissa had been happy. She was in love with Travis. She had no enemies, no one who would want to hurt her. She'd never mentioned being afraid of anyone or anything. And then there was Travis. Travis Holbrook, the boyfriend, the last person scheduled to see her. In any missing person case, you look at the intimate partner first. It's just statistics. Most women who are murdered by someone they know, usually a boyfriend or husband. Detective Vargas brought Travis in for questioning on September 27th. Travis came willingly, said he wanted to help, said he'd do anything to find Melissa. Travis's story was simple. He'd gotten off work at 6, driven home to his apartment across town, showered, changed clothes, left his place at 7:59, drove to Melissa's apartment, got there around 8:05. She wasn't there. He'd called Melissa's parents immediately.
Detective Vargas asked if they'd been fighting. Travis said no. Everything was fine. They were happy. He loved her. He wanted to marry her. Detective Vargas asked if he could search Travis's truck. Travis said yes. They searched it, found nothing suspicious. No blood, no evidence, just construction tools, fast food wrappers, an old gym bag. Detective Vargas asked if he could search Travis's apartment. Travis said yes. They searched it. Again, nothing. The apartment was messy but not suspicious. Dirty dishes, unmade bed, laundry piled up, normal bachelor stuff. Travis agreed to take a polygraph test. He took it 3 days later. The results were inconclusive. Not a pass, not a fail. Inconclusive, which didn't really tell them anything. Here's the thing about Travis. He seemed genuinely distraught. He cried during the interview. He said he couldn't believe this was happening. He said he'd been planning to propose to Melissa at Christmas. He'd been saving up for a ring. But Detective Vargas had been a cop long enough to know that people can lie. People can fake emotion. Sociopaths exist. And Travis didn't have an alibi for the critical window between 7:45 and 8:05. He said he was driving, alone. Nobody saw him. Nobody could confirm his story. Travis became the prime suspect, not officially, not publicly, but in Detective Vargas's mind, Travis was the guy. He just had to prove it. Meanwhile, the search for Melissa continued. Volunteers organized search parties.
Hundreds of people turned out. They searched the desert around Alamogordo. They searched the mountains. They searched abandoned buildings. They put up missing person flyers everywhere. Her face was on every telephone pole, every store window, every community bulletin board. The local news covered the story. But remember, this was September 2001. The national news was still saturated with September 11th coverage. A missing woman in New Mexico barely registered. The story aired on local channels but didn't gain traction beyond that. Melissa's family was desperate. Robert and Carmen Rodriguez held a press conference begging for information. Carmen broke down crying on camera, pleading for whoever took her daughter to bring her home. The footage was heartbreaking. Days turned into weeks. No body was found. No evidence was discovered. No witnesses came forward with useful information. It was like Melissa had been erased from existence. Detective Vargas kept digging into Travis's background. He found some interesting things. Travis had a temper. His ex-girlfriend from 3 years ago said he'd been controlling, jealous. He'd never hit her, but he'd punched walls, broken things, screamed. She'd broken up with him because she was scared of him. This was important information. It painted a picture, but it wasn't proof. It wasn't evidence. You can't arrest someone for having a bad temper. Detective Vargas also discovered that Travis had been lying about something. Small lies, but lies nonetheless. Travis said he'd left work at 6, but his time card showed he'd clocked out at 5:30. That gave him an extra 30 minutes unaccounted for. When confronted, Travis said he'd gotten the time mixed up, said he'd stopped for gas, but he couldn't remember which gas station, didn't have a receipt. More red flags, but still not enough.
They searched Melissa's computer, her email, her old MySpace account. Nothing suspicious. No secret boyfriend, no stalker, no threatening messages. Her life was exactly what it appeared to be. Normal, ordinary, boring in the best way. They looked at her bank accounts. No unusual activity, no large withdrawals. The last transaction was $20 at a grocery store the day before she disappeared. They checked her phone records. The last calls were to her mom, Travis, and Jennifer, all people they'd already talked to. No mysterious numbers, no red flags. They checked security footage from businesses near the apartment complex. There weren't many cameras in that area in 2001. They found footage from a gas station half a mile away, but nothing useful. Just cars driving by, none that they could identify as connected to Melissa. 1 month passed, then 2 months, then 3. Christmas came, the Christmas that Travis said he'd been planning to propose. Carmen Rodriguez couldn't put up a tree, couldn't decorate, couldn't celebrate. Her daughter was missing. Detective Vargas never stopped working the case. He re-interviewed Travis multiple times. Each time, Travis's story stayed the same, consistent, which was either the truth or a sign of a well-rehearsed lie. 6 months in, Detective Vargas got a warrant to track Travis's cell phone location from the day Melissa disappeared. Remember, this was 2001. Cell phone tracking wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. But they could ping towers, figure out general locations. The data showed Travis's phone pinged off a tower near his apartment until 7:50. Then it went dark, like he'd turned it off. It pinged again at 8:06 near Melissa's apartment. That 20-minute window was blank. When asked about this, Travis said his phone had died, said he'd forgotten to charge it, said it turned back on when he plugged it into his truck charger on the way to Melissa's place. Possible? Yes. Convenient? Also yes. The investigation hit wall after wall. They looked at other potential suspects. Was there someone else in Melissa's life? Someone with a grudge? A patient at the dental office who'd become obsessed with her? They interviewed every patient who'd come in during the month before she disappeared. Nothing. They looked at registered sex offenders in the area. There were 7 within a 5-mile radius of Melissa's apartment. They interviewed all of them, checked their alibis. Nothing connected them to Melissa. They brought in cadaver dogs, searched the desert around the apartment complex. The dogs hit on nothing. If Melissa was out there, they couldn't find her. 1-year anniversary, September 26th, 2002. Still no answers. Carmen and Robert Rodriguez held a vigil, lit candles, prayed, cried. They'd aged 10 years in 12 months. Travis stopped cooperating with police, got a lawyer, refused to answer any more questions, which was his right, but it looked bad, made him look guilty. The case started to go cold. Not officially. Detective Vargas never closed it, but without new leads, without new evidence, there was nowhere to go. He had a suspect he couldn't charge, a victim he couldn't find, a family he couldn't give answers to. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. The investigation continued but slower. Other cases demanded attention. Detective Vargas got promoted to sergeant. He still thought about Melissa, still kept the case file on his desk. But the trail was frozen.
18 years. That's how long the Rodriguez family lived without answers. 18 years of agony, of not knowing, of hoping and despairing in equal measure. Carmen Rodriguez never moved, never changed her phone number, just in case Melissa tried to call, just in case someone had information. She kept Melissa's bedroom exactly as it was. The same posters on the walls, the same stuffed animals on the bed, the same clothes in the closet. Every year, on September 26th, Carmen held a vigil. Some years, dozens of people came. Friends, family, community members who still remembered. Other years, especially as time went on, it was just Carmen, Robert, and Danny. The crowd got smaller as memories faded. Life moves on. People forget. But Carmen never forgot. Robert withdrew into himself. The outgoing, friendly man he'd been before disappeared along with his daughter. He stopped going to barbecues, stopped hanging out with friends. Work and home, that was his life. He couldn't enjoy anything. How could he enjoy anything when Melissa was out there somewhere? Danny, Melissa's younger brother, struggled in his own way. He'd been 21 years old when she disappeared, just a kid himself. He finished community college, got a job as an electrician, got married, had 2 kids, named his daughter Melissa Rose, his way of keeping his sister's memory alive. But he had nightmares, saw a therapist, dealt with survivor's guilt. Why did he get to live his life when his sister didn't? Jennifer, the best friend, moved away, couldn't stay in Alamogordo. Too many memories, too much pain. Every street corner reminded her of Melissa. She moved to Texas, started over. But she called Carmen on her birthday every year, on the anniversary.
They'd cried together over the phone, two women connected by grief. Travis Holbrook left town too, moved to Arizona about 3 years after Melissa disappeared. He got married, had kids, built a life. Some people saw this as proof of guilt. How could he move on so easily? But others said grief affects people differently. Some people need an escape, need a fresh start. Detective Michael Vargas, now Sergeant Vargas, retired in 2014, 13 years after Melissa's disappearance. His retirement party was nice. People gave speeches, talked about all the cases he'd solved. But afterwards, he told his wife that the one case he'd never solved haunted him, Melissa Rodriguez. He'd failed her family. The case officially went cold in 2007, transferred to the Cold Case Unit. A younger detective, Detective Angela Torres, took it over. She reviewed everything, read all the reports, interviewed people again. But she hit the same walls. No body, no evidence, no witnesses, just a woman who'd vanished into thin air.
Technology advanced. DNA testing got better. Forensic science improved. Detective Torres submitted evidence from Melissa's apartment for retesting in 2012. Maybe they'd missed something. Maybe new technology would reveal fingerprints, hair, something. The results came back. Nothing new. The only DNA in the apartment belonged to Melissa, her family, Travis, and Jennifer, all people who were supposed to be there. Detective Torres created a Facebook page for the case in 2015. Social media was becoming a tool for cold cases. Maybe someone out there knew something. Maybe they'd kept quiet for years, but would speak up now. The page got a few thousand followers. People shared Melissa's photo, shared the story, but no credible tips came in. In 2017, Detective Torres got Travis to agree to an interview. First time he'd talked to police in over a decade. He'd agreed through his lawyer. They met at a lawyer's office in Phoenix. Detective Torres flew out there with hope in her heart. Maybe after all these years, Travis would confess, or slip up, say something incriminating. The interview lasted 2 hours. Travis's story hadn't changed. Still said the same thing he'd said in 2001. Still said he loved Melissa. Still said he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Still said he wished he knew what happened to her. Detective Torres came back empty-handed, frustrated, convinced Travis knew more than he was saying, but unable to prove it. The years dragged on. 2018. Carmen Rodriguez was 64 years old. Robert was 67. They were getting older. Health problems started. Robert had a heart attack. Survived, but it was a wake-up call. How much time did they have left? Would they die without ever knowing what happened to their daughter? Carmen started writing letters to Detective Torres, begging her not to give up. Please keep looking. Please find my daughter. I need to know. I need to bury her. I need closure. The letters were heartbreaking. Detective Torres kept every one. Melissa would have been 42 years old in 2018. 42. She'd missed everything. Missed watching her brother get married. Missed meeting her niece and nephew. Missed her parents' 40th anniversary. Missed 18 years of birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesday afternoons.
All of it, gone. The case seemed hopeless, unsolvable, one of those mysteries that would never be answered, a family doomed to live in limbo forever, not knowing, always wondering, always hoping, always fearing the worst. But then, 2019, June, something happened, something nobody expected, a phone call, one simple phone call, and everything changed.
June 7th, 2019. A Friday. Detective Angela Torres was at her desk working on another case when her phone rang. The caller was a man named David Brennan. He was calling from Albuquerque, about 200 miles north of Alamogordo. He was a real estate developer, and he had information about Melissa Rodriguez. Detective Torres's heart started racing. She got calls like this occasionally, people who claimed to have information. Most of the time it led nowhere. False tips, confused people, attention seekers. But something about this call felt different. David Brennan explained. His company had just purchased a large piece of land on the outskirts of Alamogordo. They were planning to build a housing development. They'd started clearing the land, grading it, preparing for construction. On June 5th, 2 days earlier, one of the construction workers had been operating an excavator, moving dirt, digging. The bucket had hit something hard, not rock, something else. The worker had stopped, gotten out, gone to look. It was bone, human bone. They'd immediately stopped work, called the police. The Alamogordo Police Department had come out, secured the scene, called in forensic anthropologists from the University of New Mexico. The remains had been carefully excavated over the next 2 days. What they found was a shallow grave, about 3 feet deep, the body of a woman. Skeletal remains, partially decomposed clothing, and jewelry, a silver cross necklace. Detective Torres's felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She knew. Before DNA confirmed it, before official identification, she knew. This was Melissa. The location, that was the key piece. The land where the body was found. It was about 4 miles from Melissa's apartment, 4 miles into the desert, off a dirt road that hardly anyone used. Remote, isolated. The kind of place you'd only go if you knew exactly where you were going. Detective Torres immediately pulled up property records. Who had owned that land in 2001? It had been privately owned. A man named Gerald Novak. He'd owned 50 acres out there. Used it for nothing, just held on to it. Speculation, maybe. Gerald Novak had died in 2016. The land had passed to his estate, sat empty for 3 years until David Brennan's company bought it. This was huge. This was the break they needed. They had a body. They had a location. Now they could build a case. The forensic anthropologists worked carefully, documented everything, photographed the scene, collected all the bones, all the evidence, all the clothing fragments, everything. They found Melissa's remains, her bones, her skull, blunt force trauma to the back of the head. She'd been hit, hard, multiple times, enough to kill her.
The forensic anthropologists said death would have been relatively quick, some small mercy in that. They found her clothing, the jeans she'd been wearing, the blue t-shirt, mostly decomposed but identifiable. They found her necklace, the silver cross, tarnished but intact.
DNA confirmed what everyone already knew. This was Melissa Ann Rodriguez, 24 years old, missing since September 26, 2001, found June 5, 2019, 18 years later. Detective Torres called Carmen Rodriguez. This was the worst phone call she'd ever had to make. Worse than telling someone their loved one is missing, because this was final. This was confirmation. There'd always been a tiny sliver of hope that maybe Melissa was alive somewhere. Amnesia, kidnapped but alive, something. But now that hope was gone. Melissa was dead. Had been dead for 18 years. Carmen screamed, then sobbed, then went silent, then asked the question she'd been asking for 18 years. Who did this? Who killed my daughter? Detective Torres said, "We're going to find out. I promise you, we're going to find out." The media exploded. Missing woman found dead after 18 years. Cold case reopened. New investigation. It was all over the news. Local, national, even international news picked it up. The story had everything. A young woman, a mysterious disappearance, a shallow grave in the desert, finally found after nearly 2 decades. Tips started pouring in. People who'd known Melissa, people who'd seen things in 2001 and hadn't spoken up, people who'd been afraid, people who'd moved away and were just now hearing the news. And one tip stood out. A woman named Sandra Phelps. She called Detective Torres 3 days after the body was discovered, said she had information. Important information. Information she'd kept secret for 18 years.
Sandra Phelps, 47 years old. Living in Colorado in 2019. But in 2001, she lived in Alamogordo. She'd worked construction. And she dated Travis Holbrook's best friend. Sandra's voice was shaking when she talked to Detective Torres. She said she'd carried this secret for 18 years. Said it had eaten her alive. Said she'd tried to convince herself she was wrong, that what she knew didn't matter. But now that they'd found Melissa's body, she had to speak up. Here's what Sandra told Detective Torres. On September 26, 2001, around 7:30 in the evening, she'd been at her boyfriend's house. His name was Marcus Webb. Marcus was Travis's best friend. They'd known each other since high school. Travis had shown up unexpectedly. He'd seemed agitated, nervous, sweating. Marcus had asked what was wrong. Travis said he needed help. He'd done something bad. Something really bad. At first, Marcus thought Travis meant he'd gotten into a fight, punched someone, that kind of thing. But Travis said no. Worse. He'd hurt Melissa. Hurt her bad. She was dead. Sandra was in the other room, but could hear everything. She'd frozen. Not sure she'd heard correctly. Travis had killed Melissa. Marcus had freaked out. asked what happened. Travis said they'd gotten into a fight. Melissa had said she wanted to break up, said she'd been seeing someone else. Travis had lost it, grabbed her. She'd tried to run. He chased her, caught her outside her apartment, grabbed a rock, hit her with it. She'd gone down. He'd hit her again and again. Marcus had asked if he was sure she was dead. Travis said yes. He'd checked. She wasn't breathing. There was blood, so much blood. He'd panicked, put her body in the back of his truck, covered her with a tarp. Didn't know what else to do. Travis begged Marcus to help him, said he needed to bury the body, needed to hide what he'd done. Marcus was his best friend. Please, please help me. Sandra said Marcus had hesitated, had said this was crazy. They should call the police. But Travis broke down, started crying, said his life would be over, said he'd made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but he couldn't go to prison. Please. And Marcus agreed. God help him, Marcus agreed. Sandra said she should have called the police right then, should have done something. But she was terrified. Marcus was her boyfriend. She didn't want him to go to prison. And Travis had always scared her a little, that temper of his. So she stayed quiet, hated herself for it, but stayed quiet. Travis and Marcus left together in Travis's truck, took shovels from Marcus's garage, drove out into the desert. Sandra didn't go with them, didn't want to know the details. They came back around 11 o'clock. Travis's clothes were dirty. Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost. They'd buried Melissa out on Gerald Novak's land. Travis knew the area because he'd done construction work out there once. Knew nobody ever went out there. Knew it was remote, safe. He dug a shallow grave, put Melissa's body in it, covered her up, tried to make it look like nothing had happened. After that night, Sandra said Marcus was never the same. He had nightmares, started drinking. Their relationship fell apart. They broke up 6 months later. Sandra moved to Colorado, tried to forget, tried to move on with her life. Marcus Webb had died in 2013. Car accident, single vehicle, drove off a mountain road. Some people said it was an accident. Sandra always wondered if it was suicide, if the guilt had finally been too much. Detective Torres asked why Sandra had waited so long, why she hadn't come forward in 2001, or after Marcus died, or any time in between. Sandra said she'd been afraid of Travis, afraid of being implicated as an accessory, afraid nobody would believe her, but mostly just afraid. And she'd told herself maybe she'd misunderstood, maybe it hadn't happened the way she remembered, maybe she dreamed it, anything to avoid facing the truth. But now they'd found Melissa, and Sandra couldn't stay silent anymore. She had to tell the truth, even if it meant trouble for herself, even if it was 18 years too late. She had to do the right thing. Detective Torres thanked Sandra for her courage, asked her to come to New Mexico, give an official statement. Sandra agreed, said she'd fly out the next day. This was it. This was everything Detective Torres needed. An eyewitness, someone who'd heard Travis confess, someone who knew where the body was buried before anyone else knew. The pieces were falling into place.
But Sandra's testimony alone wasn't enough. It was hearsay. She'd overheard a conversation 18 years ago. No physical evidence tied Travis to the murder. No DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon. The rock Travis had used was long gone. And Marcus, the only other person who could corroborate Sandra's story, was dead. Detective Torres needed more. She got a warrant for Travis's phone records from 2001. She'd looked at these before, but now she knew what to look for. And there it was. At 7:23 on September 26th, Travis's phone had pinged off a tower near Melissa's apartment, not near his own apartment like he'd claimed. He'd already been in the area when he said he was still at home. And there was a call. At 7:18, Travis had called Marcus. The call lasted 3 minutes, right around the time he would have killed Melissa, right before he went to Marcus's house to ask for help. Detective Torres got a warrant for Travis's financial records from 2001. She found a cash withdrawal, $300, taken out on September 27th, the day Melissa disappeared, the day he was being questioned by police. He'd claimed he had no money, claimed he was broke, but he'd withdrawn $300. Why? Maybe to pay Marcus for helping, or maybe for some other reason. It was suspicious. She tracked down people who'd worked with Travis in 2001, asked about his temper, his behavior around that time. One coworker remembered Travis missing work on September 27th, called in sick. But the coworker had seen him that evening at a bar. Didn't look sick, looked stressed, scared even. Everything was adding up. The timeline, the motive, the opportunity, the confession Sandra had overheard, the location of the body matching where Travis would have known. All of it pointed to Travis Holbrook. On June 23, 2019, Detective Torres flew to Phoenix with 2 officers. They had an arrest warrant. Murder in the first degree. Melissa Ann Rodriguez. They knocked on Travis's door at 6 in the morning. His wife answered. Confused, scared. Detective Torres asked for Travis. He came to the door. Older now, 48 years old. Gray in his hair, lines on his face, but still the same man. Detective Torres read his rights. Travis Holbrook, you are under arrest for the murder of Melissa Ann Rodriguez. He didn't say anything, didn't protest, didn't ask questions, just stood there, stone-faced. Then quietly asked if he could kiss his wife goodbye. They put him in handcuffs, walked him to the car. His wife was crying on the doorstep. His kids, teenagers now, were watching from the window. Travis's entire life, the life he'd built on a lie, was crumbling. They brought him back to New Mexico, booked him, put him in a cell. He refused to talk without a lawyer. Smart. But it didn't matter. They had enough. 3 days later, Travis's lawyer came to Detective Torres, said his client wanted to make a deal, wanted to talk, but only if the death penalty was off the table. New Mexico had abolished the death penalty in 2009, so that was already off the table, but they let Travis think he was getting something. Let him think he was negotiating. Travis gave a full confession, videotaped, in the presence of his lawyer. He told them everything.
He said he and Melissa had been fighting that week. She'd been distant, cold. He'd suspected she was cheating, had become paranoid about it. On September 26th,
he'd driven to her apartment early, around 7:15, earlier than they'd planned. He'd wanted to surprise her, catch her with someone else, prove his suspicions. But there was no one else. Melissa was alone, watering her plants. He confronted her anyway, accused her of cheating. She denied it, said he was being crazy, controlling, said she was tired of his jealousy, tired of him showing up unannounced, tired of him calling all the time, said maybe they should take a break. That word, break, it had set him off. He'd grabbed her arm. She'd pulled away, told him to leave. He'd refused. They'd argued. She'd tried to go inside, lock him out. He'd followed her, pushed his way in. She'd slapped him. He'd lost control. He said he'd grabbed her, thrown her against the wall. She'd fought back, scratched his face. He'd been enraged. Had grabbed a decorative rock she'd kept on her patio, a paperweight type thing, heavy, smooth. He'd hit her with it, once. She'd fallen. He'd hit her again, and again, until she stopped moving. Travis said he'd stood there for a minute, couldn't believe what he'd done. Then panic had set in. He'd checked for a pulse. Nothing. She was dead. He'd killed her. He'd wrapped her body in the tarp from his truck, carried her out to the parking lot. It was dark. Nobody saw. Or if they did, they didn't realize what they were seeing. He'd driven to Marcus's house, confessed, begged for help. Marcus had helped him bury the body. They'd driven out to Gerald Novak's land, dug a grave, put Melissa in it, covered her up, tried to make it look undisturbed. Then Travis had gone back to Melissa's apartment, had to make it look normal. He'd cleaned up the blood on the patio, tipped over the watering can to make it look like maybe she'd just wandered off, locked the sliding door, went back inside, made sure there was no evidence, then left. Waited 20 minutes, came back, knocked on the door, acted surprised when nobody answered, called her parents, played the concerned boyfriend. He'd thought he'd gotten away with it. For 18 years, he'd thought he'd gotten away with it. He'd moved on, built a new life, had almost convinced himself it hadn't happened, that it was a bad dream. But it had happened. And Melissa Rodriguez had been in the ground for 18 years while he lived his life, while he got married, had kids, celebrated birthdays and holidays, while her parents suffered, while her brother grew up without his sister, while her best friend grieved. Travis said he was sorry, said he'd made a terrible mistake, said he was young and stupid and jealous, said he wished he could take it back. But sorry doesn't bring anyone back. Sorry doesn't give a family 18 years. Sorry means nothing.
The trial began in March of 2020. Travis Holbrook pleaded not guilty despite his confession. His lawyers tried to get the confession thrown out, said it was coerced. The judge disagreed. The confession stood. The prosecution's case was strong. They had Sandra Pelps's testimony. They had the phone records. They had the body found exactly where someone with Travis's knowledge would have hidden it. They had the confession. They had motive, means, and opportunity.
The defense tried to argue that Sandra's testimony was unreliable, that she'd waited 18 years to come forward, that she couldn't possibly remember accurately after so long, that she might be lying for attention. But Sandra was credible. She was calm on the stand, detailed, consistent. She had nothing to gain from lying. She cried when she talked about staying silent all those years, said it was the biggest regret of her life. The prosecution brought in the forensic anthropologist, explained how Melissa had died, blunt force trauma, multiple blows to the head, defensive wounds on her arms where she'd tried to protect herself. She'd fought for her life. It hadn't been quick. It hadn't been painless. They showed photos of the gravesite, photos of Melissa's remains, photos of the silver cross necklace. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. Carmen Rodriguez testified. She talked about her daughter, about the kind of person Melissa was, about 18 years of not knowing, 18 years of hope and despair, 18 years of imagining the worst and then finding out the worst was true. She looked directly at Travis when she spoke. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the table, wouldn't look up. Robert Rodriguez testified too. He talked about the toll Melissa's disappearance had taken on their family, how they'd never recovered, how they'd never moved on, how every holiday was torture, every birthday, every Sunday when Melissa should have been at dinner. Danny testified, talked about losing his big sister, about growing up without her, about the hole in his life that could never be filled, about naming his daughter after her because he wanted his kids to know what an amazing person their aunt had been. Jennifer testified, broke down on the stand, could barely speak, talked about losing her best friend, about all the phone calls that never came, all the moments they should have shared, weddings and babies and ordinary Tuesday afternoons, all of it stolen by Travis Holbrook's jealousy and rage. The defense put Travis on the stand. Risky move, but they were desperate. Travis testified that he'd lied in his confession, said the police had pressured him, said he was tired, confused, said he didn't kill Melissa, said he loved her.
The prosecution tore him apart on cross-examination. Asked about the phone records, Travis said he'd been confused about the timeline. Asked about being in the area earlier than he'd claimed. Travis said he'd forgotten. Asked about calling Marcus right after Melissa died. Travis said Marcus was his best friend. He called him all the time. It was pathetic, transparent. Nobody believed him. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, came back with a verdict, guilty. Murder in the first degree. Travis showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead. His wife buried her face in her hands. His mother sobbed. His children weren't in the courtroom. Probably better that way. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. In New Mexico, first-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence, no parole. The judge was a woman named Judith Martinez. She'd been on the bench for 20 years. She'd seen everything. But even she seemed affected by this case. Judge Martinez looked at Travis, said, "You took a vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and you snuffed it out in a moment of rage. You didn't just kill Melissa Rodriguez, you killed the future she should have had.
the family she might have raised, the lives she might have touched. You buried her in the desert like she was nothing, like she didn't matter. And then you went on with your life, got married, had children, celebrated birthdays and Christmases while her family suffered, while they wondered and hoped and prayed. You are a coward, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about what you've done. She sentenced him to life without parole, plus additional years for tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. Not that it mattered. Life meant life. Travis was led away in shackles. He looked back once at his wife. She turned away, couldn't look at him. Their marriage was over. She'd file for divorce 3 months later. Carmen and Robert Rodriguez held each other in the courtroom. They were crying, but these were different tears, not tears of not knowing, tears of knowing, of closure, of justice finally served. After the sentencing, Carmen gave a statement to the press. She said, "My daughter can finally rest in peace. We can finally say goodbye properly. It took 18 years, but we got justice. Melissa mattered. Her life mattered. And now everyone knows what happened to Melissa." Melissa's remains were released to the family. They held a funeral, a real funeral, not a memorial service with no body, a funeral. They buried her at the cemetery where her grandparents were buried, had a headstone made. Melissa Ann Rodriguez, 1977 to 2001. Beloved daughter, sister, and friend, forever in our hearts. Hundreds of people came to the funeral. People who'd known Melissa, people who'd searched for her, people who'd never met her but were touched by her story. They filled the church, stood in the aisles, overflowed into the parking lot. Jennifer gave a eulogy, talked about her best friend, about inside jokes and late-night conversations and dreams of the future, about a friendship cut short by violence, about 18 years of missing someone, about finally being able to say goodbye. It wasn't the ending anyone wanted, but it was an ending. And after 18 years of questions, sometimes an answer, even a terrible answer, is better than not knowing. So that's the story of Melissa Rodriguez, a 24-year-old woman who was killed by the man who claimed to love her, who was buried in a shallow grave in the New Mexico desert, who was missing for 18 years until a construction worker's excavator unearthed her remains, whose family never gave up hope, whose case was finally solved by one woman's courage to speak up after nearly 2 decades of silence. Travis Holbrook is currently serving his life sentence at the Penitentiary of New Mexico in Santa Fe. He'll be 75 years old before he's even eligible to request a compassionate release, which he'll never get. He'll die in prison, as he should. Sandra Phelps was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She wasn't charged with being an accessory after the fact. The prosecution decided that her testimony was too valuable and that she'd already carried the burden of guilt for 18 years. Some people criticized this decision, said she should have been punished for staying silent. but others said she'd punished herself enough, that having the courage to finally speak up redeemed her. Carmen and Robert Rodriguez still live in Alamogordo. Carmen is 66 now. Robert is 69. They visit Melissa's grave every Sunday after church, bring flowers, talk to her, tell her about their week, about Danny's kids, about life continuing without her.
They've started a foundation in Melissa's name. The Melissa Rodriguez Foundation helps families of missing persons, provides support, resources, counseling, helps keep cases alive, keeps missing people's names and faces in the public eye. It's Carmen's way of making sure Melissa's death means something, that some good comes from all this tragedy. Danny is doing better. Therapy helped. His daughter, Melissa Rose, is 8 years old now. She knows she's named after her aunt, knows the story, age-appropriate version anyway. When she's older, Danny will tell her everything, will make sure she knows what an incredible person her aunt was. Jennifer still lives in Texas. She and Carmen talk regularly. They've become close in a way they weren't before, bonded by shared grief and the long wait for answers. Jennifer says she thinks about Melissa every day, says there's not a day that goes by when she doesn't wish she could call her best friend one more time. Detective Angela Torres received a commendation for solving the case, but she says it wasn't her. It was Sandra finding the courage to speak up. It was the construction worker who stopped when he hit something with his excavator. It was 18 years of people refusing to forget Melissa. It was a community that never gave up. This case teaches us some hard lessons about domestic violence, about controlling relationships, about the warning signs we ignore. Melissa's friends noticed that Travis was jealous, controlling. His ex-girlfriend knew he had a temper, but nobody said anything strong enough. Nobody intervened. Would it have made a difference? We'll never know. But maybe, if someone had pulled Melissa aside and said, "This guy scares me," maybe if someone had said, "I think you should break up with him," maybe she'd have done it differently. Somewhere public, somewhere safe. Or maybe it would have happened anyway. We can't know. What we do know is that Melissa Rodriguez was a real person, not just a victim, not just a name in a news story. She was a daughter who called her mom every day, a sister who never missed Sunday dinner, a friend who remembered your birthday, a woman who wanted to see the ocean, who loved mystery novels and plant houses and helping nervous kids at the dentist. She mattered. Her life had value, and her death diminished the world. 23 years after she disappeared, that's how long it took to get justice. Too long, far too long, but better late than never. Better to know than never to know. Better to have an ending, even a tragic one, than to spend the rest of your life wondering. If you're in a relationship with someone who scares you, someone who's controlling,
someone who makes you feel like you're walking on eggshells, please reach out. Talk to someone. Get help. There are resources, hotlines, shelters, people who can help you leave safely. Because Melissa didn't get that chance, but you can. And if you know something about a missing person case, speak up. Don't wait 18 years like Sandra did. Don't carry that burden. Don't let guilt eat you alive. Call the police. Tell them what you know. You might be the key to bringing someone home. You might be the answer a family has been praying for. Remember Melissa Ann Rodriguez. Remember that she was here, that she lived, that she loved and was loved, that her life mattered, that her death wasn't in vain if we learn from it, if we do better, if we protect each other, if we speak up when something's wrong. Rest in peace, Melissa. You deserved so much better than what happened to you. But you're home now. You're with your family. You're at peace. And Travis Holbrook will never hurt anyone again. That's the end of this story. Thank you for listening. And please, if you or someone you know needs help, reach out. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. You're not alone. There's help available. Don't become another Melissa Rodriguez. Your life matters. You matter.